So first we have Mark.
Hello everyone, I'm Mark Spokes. I directed the Sinking Feeling and I'm an animator at Blue Zoo.
Cool. And then we have two Jacks. I'll go with Jack McEntire first.
Hello, I'm Jack and I'm a lighting comp artist and I did the lighting comp for this job.
Cool. And then we have Sarah.
Hey, I'm Sarah. I'm a CG character animator at Blue Zoo and I did some of the animation.
Cool. And we have Millie as well.
Hello, I'm Millie's spouse. I'm Russ Nuddy on Twitter, and I'm the one who plays with crayons in the corner while I do 2D effects art over the top.
And last but not least, Jack Sainsbury.
Hi there, I'm Jack Sainsbury. I'm a real-time TD here at Blue Zoo, and I was responsible for a lot of the look development and rendering on the project.
Excellent. So yeah, we're going to talk a bit about how it came about, how it was made. If you do have any questions whilst we're talking, please do drop them in the question box at the bottom and we'll answer them at some point. So before we jump into kind of like how the film was made, I thought people might want to know actually what happened before that point, how the film came into being. And it was because we've done our Blue Zoo shorts at Blue Zoo for a few years, which are all about kind of making short films, experimenting and giving people the opportunity in the studio to direct their own films and try new things, and for everyone to experiment with kind of new styles and different ways of making films. We've done like shorts using doing real-time rendering and projecting with light, all sorts. And we generally, our shorts have often been kind of at Christmas time, especially kind of comedy based. But we thought last autumn, when we were, going into thinking about a brief for this, we thought, it's maybe not the right time to be making a comedy animation, which, we do spend a lot of money making. And we thought, wouldn't it be better if we actually, used our platform and skills to help people out there when there's so many people who are struggling. So on the exec team, we looked at what different charities we could help, and we found Papyrus. And through their website, we discovered that suicide is the biggest cause of death amongst young people in the UK, which was really shocking. And I had no idea it was that much. So we chose to help Papyrus, and we got in contact with them and we said, can we make you a short film to help your mission in reducing that? And so they said yeah, they'd love to. So what we did, we had a conversation with them to understand how we could use animation to help them, and we recorded that conversation and then opened that up to everyone in the studio. One thing which made this short a bit different is throughout lockdown we had a few of the studio got together to start a virtual choir, and we had one showing where they sang one of their songs, and it was so beautiful. Someone suggested let's do the next Blue Zoo short using a Blue Zoo choir, so we did. So we looked at some songs, and the Blue Zoo choir suggested True Colours, and we picked that song and asked Sony if we could use it, and they said yes. So that was the brief. It was a video talking to Papyrus about what they would like to do, and they said their biggest thing is trying to reduce the stigma about talking about suicide with people who you might be worried about who are struggling. So that was essentially the brief, and using the song. So we put that out to everyone and said, just pitch with a style, a concept, a few images, just a 3-page pitch, and then we'll put it to the studio vote. And everyone voted, and Papyrus did too. And then the winner was picked, which was Mark. So first off, I wanted to ask Mark, when he saw the brief, how did you move? What did you do with your pitch, or where did the ideas come from?
Thanks, Tom. When I first saw the pitch, I immediately knew I wanted to brief. When I saw the brief, I immediately knew I wanted to pitch for it, because it had already, there's multiple points in my life already where I know multiple friends have made attempts on their life. So it was already quite a topical subject for me, and I really wanted to try and come up with an idea that would well, I approached the brief, but I wanted to come up with a really strong visual metaphor for what it is like to struggle with poor mental health and suicidal thoughts. And eventually I came up with this idea of someone sinking into the ground. And I thought it worked quite well because they would be sinking into the ground, but no one else around them would notice. No one else around them can really tell that they're doing it. But that's what it feels like to them. And that's sort of where the idea started. So I made out a little story outline of this young man, like in a student sort of age, struggling with this sort of sinking into the ground as though it was quicksand or mud, and no one else around them seems to notice apart from eventually their friend, who after they sink all the way down underneath, the friend notices something's wrong and comes in to save them and gets them to open up. And that's really part of the brief from Papyrus, was to focus not so much on getting people who are struggling to reach out to others, but getting people to reach out to their friends or family members who are struggling, to get people to reach out to people who they think might have suicidal thoughts, and to break that sort of stigma about talking about it, and to open up the conversation, and potentially save lives that way. And that was the focus of this. I really wanted this other character, this friend character, to be the sort of actual hero in the end that comes forward and saves this person who's been sinking down to the ground. For brevity's sake, for the sake of like making the short, we named the guy who was sinking into the ground Benji, and his best friend, we named him Jack, the person who actually comes and helps him. So I put together this this pitch document. Yeah, the style, we knew we wanted to make it 2D because we wanted to marry sort of 2D, like traditional like 3D animation, which the studio does a lot of and we're very good at, we wanted to match 3D animation with 2D visual effects of the sinking, like the effects of the ripples and the sinking as this person sinks into the ground. And so that was partially why we wanted to create this very graphic, like flat 2D aesthetic. But we also wanted to keep the background like as minimal as possible. We really wanted to just give this strong minimalist sort of aesthetic, so it wouldn't distract from the story, because the story and the metaphor, the visual metaphor, was so strong. We didn't really want to distract from that, so we just kept it really simple, so that all the focus would be on the characters and their emotions, and that's sort of how we ended up doing it. And I think at this point as well, pitching this, I knew I wanted to do it in Blender, because I wanted to try using Blender's grease pencil tool, which I'm sure we'll get into more about later.
Was that? I don't know if that's part of the pitch brief. Was it to use Blender? I can't even remember now.
It might have been shortly after pitching this. I think I even mentioned it in that third panel that I kind of interested about using. But yeah, there it is, Blender's grease pencil tool, because I felt like that would be an interesting way of marrying traditional like 2D animation with 3D. Whilst keeping it all within one scene. It seemed like a quite streamlined way of doing it, and it kind of was. Yeah, kind of. We'll get into that.
I was going to say, just because I've just reread that whilst you were talking there, and it is, but nothing changed. So
nothing changed.
A testament to your directing, and which is so hard. I'm sure anyone who's made a film before knows how hard it is to keep to that vision. But if you read that, it is word for word what it ended up, which is
pretty much, yeah. It stayed pretty similar throughout the whole production. I think the charity really liked the core idea of it at first, or they loved it, but what they weren't quite sure about was the ending, when they both end up on this rowboat, and they end up like sort of sailing off to like rowing off together. And I think, well, obviously the idea of that behind us, because I didn't want to give this impression that suddenly he's not sinking into the ground anymore, because that's unrealistic. People with mental health problems don't just go away. So we didn't want to give this impression that he's fine now, but we did want to show the idea that through friendship and through collaboration and through like support, and also I suppose with help from Papyrus, is what we're also sort of giving the idea across, is that with all that support, they can make their lives much easier and they can help each other. And that was the idea of them. There's still this idea that he's sinking, but now they're on a boat and they're helping each other out. And I think Papyrus didn't quite understand that when they read this, but then when they saw the 2D animatic, maybe 2 weeks later, they suddenly went, oh, we get it.
usually on the short we have people wanting to, but I think this one was extra special, whereas it was such a subject matter that's close to a lot of people, where I think we had, was it 50 people worked on it in the end? I think that's how many.
It was close to 60 in the end.
60, yeah, which was a testament to how much everyone really wanted to help on it.
Yeah.
Cool. So I just want to open up actually, because unfortunately Grant wasn't able to join us on this call today, and he's on holiday. So Grant, we wish you're here. You're here in spirit, but because it wouldn't have been what it is without Grant, who was the art director on it. So I was just going to open his deck to browse through that, Mark, to show some of the immense work that went into the art direction. Hang on a sec. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So Mark, do you want to talk about some of the what went on here?
Well, some of the, like Grant really was a powerhouse for designing this. He really did most of the character designs and prop designs. And originally, some of the early on like design choices were with, for example, Benji, the character who's sinking. For early on, I definitely wanted this idea of this hood that's like pulled tight around to try and give to be a visual identification of the fact that he's being boxed in. He feels like he's isolating himself from others, isn't he? And he's not opening up about his problem. If he could just explain to other people, but no one else seems to quite know. It's like no one else knows what he's going through, and that was like a visual design way of showing that he's boxing himself in, and he's isolating himself from the world. For the general style, like I was saying earlier, we definitely wanted to just keep it very minimalist, just to focus on the characters, and it helps production as well go quicker because it wasn't quite a quick turnaround in the end. We really just wanted to focus on the important storytelling elements. There was one time where we were talking about, I think you brought up the idea of adding maybe a female character because it wasn't all the characters in this turned out to be male, and I think we had a discussion about it. But I think the idea was the larger proportion of young suicides with males, I felt like it seemed a bit more prudent, and also because from personal experience, I feel just having two male characters sort of going through together, and it just seemed like a more sort of genuine sort of bonding thing between two like close friends. It just seemed to work for me. If it was just two sort of friends dealing with it, it just seemed to work well that way. This teacher character as well, that was a funny one, because we definitely wanted this teacher character to come in at one point and to sort of serve as a metaphor for like an uncaring, an uncaring system that doesn't really realize that he's dealing with these, with depression or suicidal thoughts. And he starts to struggle in school, and this teacher's just there to sort of represent this thing that he's a system that's not really caring very much. But we also didn't want to give this idea that teachers are the problem and make this horrible looking teacher that was being. So it was hard to design him in this way, because if you scroll up, we almost make him look like a sort of comic book villain with his like glasses, and I really wanted that. Maybe it was just because I liked too much and I was watching too much anime at the time, but I really just wanted to do something like that. But I think it didn't work tonally in the film. It just suddenly felt so different from everything else in the film, and also we didn't want to give this idea that teachers are evil and are bully kids into suicidal thoughts. So we just wanted to keep it somewhat lax and just mellow that out a little bit. But that was an interesting little journey that we went on.
So there's so much in this deck.
There's a lot
that goes into the void as well, where Grant did amazing sketches with using charcoal and stuff, didn't he, for that?
Yeah, he ended up using real charcoal in the backgrounds, which gave it a lot more sort of rustic sort of feel. Really helped like sell it.
Yeah.
We really wanted a kind of a more ethereal sort of thing, because we wanted to keep this sort of sequence abstract as possible, because the whole film is somewhat abstract. We really wanted this under the bit where it goes underneath into the start place. We wanted to keep that abstract to help sort of this story of the film sell the story. And also we didn't want to give the impression that he was sinking underwater That was
Yeah.
something that we really wanted to avoid, because that is we're not supposed to depict a method of suicide, and that is a method of suicide. So we really wanted to try and make sure that it didn't quite come across like that. We wanted to keep it as like a more of an abstract sort of sequence.
Yeah. So then Jack Sainsbury over in Vancouver was challenged with making that work in Blender. So how did you react, Jack, on getting that brief? Were you worried about trying to be able to pull off such beautiful references?
Yeah, it was definitely quite a challenge. The style, going for something completely 2D and taking 3D. You know, we discussed having 3D characters and rendering them with that 2D aesthetic. Knew it was going to be a real challenge. Early on, ended up just looking at the difference between the two renderers, Cycles and Eevee. And initially was leaning towards Cycles because you get all these beautiful, realistic lighting and shadows, you know, really nice high fidelity stuff. But then as sort of the look progressed in talks with Mark and Grant, who obviously couldn't be here, ended up leaning more towards Eevee because it lends itself more to that stylized look. Yeah.
And I'll share a test from, this is one of the early tests. So how was that approached in Eevee?
So a lot of the lighting is done in the shaders. It's a lot of like toon lighting, and the shadows have got all that sort of grainy texture in it. It's all just shader tools essentially, which was nice because obviously Eevee you're essentially working in Final Look the whole time. It's a real-time renderer, unlike Cycles. So you can tweak all those values and play around with that really quickly and get lots of nice feedback really fast. I remember sitting in calls with Jack McEntire for hours just tweaking away at shaders across all the shots, which was good fun.
I think that was one of your first tests, this, wasn't it? I think, in terms of getting that grainy shader, because it's a tricky thing to do, getting that nuance.
It's definitely hard making it look not like a bad 3D model with like a 3D model with bad like just toon shading on it, you know. But yeah, I think we got there in the end.
I think toon shadings in 3D is one of those things where when someone does it well, it just looks effortless, but it's the hardest thing in the world.
Absolutely.
To pull off.
Yeah, no doubt. And then obviously it was probably easy with some of the, you know, there wasn't a great deal of environment and set design, which was nice. It was all the backgrounds were just like matte paintings, and I think there were about 3 or 4 props in there, you know, the table and the stamp and stuff. But yeah, I think we slaved over each of those props for longer than you would usually. So yeah, it's definitely quite a challenge.
Yeah. What did you find the biggest challenge on it was? Was there anything in particular? Oh.
Probably the toon shading. Yeah, I would say absolutely. Yeah. So many iterations. I mean, these are some of the early tests, but some of many that we were going back and forth, just you know, tweaking the gradients, trying to make them, because obviously the Benji's jacket in particular ended up with the sort of puffer jacket look to it. So you have really smooth, sort of spherical, bulky shapes which pick up any of the toon shading. You suddenly get these lines on them, which was really hard to tweak and just get it looking right.
Yeah.
But
what was the reason for that? Because originally Benji didn't have those kind of ribbing, did he?
No, initially, but he had a very different aesthetic when we first drew him. I think my very, very original designs, it worked in 2D, but when we translated it into 3D, it didn't really work. He kind of looked like a potato sack. When we tried translating it into this, you know, 3D to look like 2D design, it just didn't quite translate very well. So we needed to think of a quick way to give him a bit more form, a bit more of a complex form at the time, because it worked while still having this hood over the top. And that's one idea. I did a bunch of drawings, a bunch of designs, and that's the idea. That's the one that me and Grant ended up picking, and it seemed to work quite well. And it did make certain things a bit more tricky, like getting the right shading on it, but it ended up working pretty well. So I was quite happy.
I think it needed it.
Yeah,
it definitely looks better. Yeah.
Yeah. So next I wanted to touch on the 3D side of it, because it's all done in Blender. So it's like, obviously you did the layout. I'm going to see if I can share the, hang on. Here's that, I think.
Yeah, this is the layout that I put together.
So once we talk through this, because Sarah, you were volunteered as one of the animators on it. How did you find the experience? Had you used Blender before?
I hadn't used Blender before, so yeah, no, it was good to try something different because up until now I've only ever used Maya, and it was interesting seeing like what Blender could do and how it was the same and how it was different. But it did take a bit of an adjustment because when you get so used to where everything is and how everything works, even if those things are there in Blender, the muscle memory is not there, and it just takes that little bit of extra finding out how to do stuff.
Yeah, and because you were obviously juggling 2 jobs at the same time with using Maya in your main job, then switching over to do this, that must have been a bit tricky.
Yeah, it was. So like I was saying, like I think if I was only using Blender, I would have stuck with all of the pure Blender shortcuts and hotkeys and everything. But after a few days, I had to give up on that and switch it to, I think it's called like industry hotkeys, which basically just changes all your shortcuts to be what they are in Maya, because my brain couldn't.
So you recommend then if people are using Blender alone, use the Blender shortcuts, but if you're having to constantly jump between them, using industry might be easier on your brain.
Yeah, if you need like a bit of an ease in, switching to industry is better. But then obviously if you can stick with the actual Blender ones, you might find a better way. There were a couple of things where you could tell like, oh, actually this might be a bit better if I took the time to get to know it.
Yeah. How do you find actually kind of animating in Blender compared to Maya, like in terms of the practicalities of like keyframing or tools that you're used to in Maya that might not be there in Blender? How do you find that?
Yeah, it was pretty similar actually. I think there were some, like, we have a lot of tools in Maya that we sort of almost take for granted, like the pickers and the like Animbot and things. And obviously those aren't there, but in fact some of the stuff like tween machine, like there isn't a tween machine for Blender, but there's one already built into Blender, so you don't really need it. So again, I think it was just a case of like trying to work out what the language of what you were looking for was in Blender, and then adapting to that.
I did have a lot of animators complaining about the graph editor in Blender, but I think I've heard the latest version of Blender that I think got released recently has a much, I think they improved it a little bit, or at least made it a lot more customizable, so you can make can change, be a lot more friendly for animation.
Yeah, I think I ended up not using the graph editor very much because we were doing it on stepped.
Yeah,
so we didn't need to like smooth the curves very much. So actually, like a lot of it, I just did the posing by eye. And if anything, that little imperfection might have helped a little bit.
That's good. That was part of my reasoning for making it stepped, is because I knew the graph editor wasn't great. So I made sure, like, okay, well, let's do it stepped. I mean, there were a few other reasons for doing it like that. It helped with selling the sort of 2D style of it, and also made less work for the 2D animators as well.
And obviously this was made entirely, working remotely. And Mark, was there over 20 animators on it?
There were 20 animators on it. I remember. I mean, there were going to be, it was just maybe going to be me and like 4 other animators. But then when we showed the 2D animatics, so many animators volunteered to, we want to work, like, so came forward and said, we want to work on it, I ended up giving everyone like 1 shot each to do, which worked really well because everyone was most people at least were learning the software at the same time, and only having 1 shot meant that they could learn on the job. They it's such a small piece of work to do that they could sort of figure out how it worked and then do their shot and learn on the job rather than having a huge allocation to worry about.
And from a director's point of view, you had 20 people to kind of align in style. How was that?
It was all right. I mean, this is my first time directing for like a big commercial job like this, so it was definitely a bit nerve-wracking at first, but and having 20 animators to talk to in the day was a bit much. But to be honest, I think when the project got around to animation, I was working full time on this, so I definitely had, you know, the time to go through and talk to each animator and get exactly what I wanted, which was good. And I'm very happy with how the animation turned out for this.
And I see there's some questions coming in about Blender. So Sarah, would you want to use Blender again, or would you just want to go back to Maya?
I would like to use it again, actually. My gut reaction is to go back to Maya just because it's safe and I know it. But yeah, I'd like to have a bit more of a play with Blender. Maybe just like I say, you could, when you're just working on one shot, you're kind of just like touching on those other things that Blender can do differently and possibly in some scenarios better. So I'd like to sort of have a bit more of an explorer of that.
Yeah, excellent. It'd be lovely to see more stuff being done in Blender. So we've got the 3D done, but at the same time, the 2D or the beautiful effects were happening, which was Millie, you did a lot of that original work. Had you used Blender before?
It's my turn. Well, that was actually a bit of a thing. We all got the email of like, oh, do you want to work on this short? It's in Blender. We need 2D effects artists. And I'd only been at the studio a year or so. So I had a quick scroll through the emails and everyone was like, oh, I haven't worked in Blender before, but I'd like to help out. And I was like, oh, I've opened Blender once in my lifetime. So I can say I've opened Blender before. I've done some basic 2D animation stuff in it. So I threw my lot in and I got the job because of that, I think. But I thought it would be relatively easy to add 2D effects to a 3D area. What Blender has is that it has a 2D canvas that you can do straight up 2D animations in, just all the 2D stuff in the one specific place. And I thought, oh, if I do that all flat, it only has to be flattened into a puddle anyway. It should be relatively simple. But no, putting 2D animations into a 3D space is like a completely different thing. And it wasn't quite that simple. But after a few tutorials, I managed to get the hang of it. And then I had to teach all the other 2D animators how to do that as well.
Yeah,
it worked out.
It worked beautifully. I think. Hang on, I think I've got one of the. Is this hang on a sec.
Yeah, that one that you were just showing where he was walking forwards, right at the beginning. I asked Mark, like, "Hey, I need a practice on something.
Right.
If we can go ahead of time, can I get someone walking and sinking through a plane so I can trace where his legs are on the ground and like draw around that and figure out how it all works?" And that was a lifesaver that I got that about a month ahead of time. Here's a couple glitches with the lines you can get. That happens a lot.
That looks fun.
Yeah, the strokes turn up as 3D tubes in the space. So we actually had to minimize the strokes to 0 pixels, and then all of the puddles are fills around the strokes. So you draw the shape as one thing and it fills, and that's what you see in the end, and the fill is flat, but the strokes are gone, which is very different from usual 2D stuff because you can't draw roughs in anything. The roughs would be in this weird glitchy tube state that doesn't work. So just go straight ahead, fill it all in. The ripples are filled shapes as well. And we managed to get it to work.
Was this the very first kind of vertical slice we did, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you can see the tubes a little bit, those yellow ripples. I tried leaving them as the 3D tube strokes, but you can see they look a bit bulky and odd around it. But the blue and the darker blue as the deep puddles are just the fill cans. They turn out flat, so they work.
Yeah. How did it work in terms of chicken and eggs, in terms of having to do the 2D, but on the 3D? How was that balanced?
That worked. There's a way that there's some issues with if you're drawing straight on the screen, some of the drawings will snap on top of the 3D object and some of it will snap on the floor again. So you'll get some glitches of like, if you've drawn it from one angle, you'll turn to another angle and the drawing will flick upwards and then back down again according to where it was. But we managed to lock it all to the flat surface, which worked. And then after that, there was one thing, both because 3D, you can do it at any frame rate you want. You can have it lots of frames. I very quickly realized I have to limit the amount of frames we've got because it's a lot of drawing for a 2D person to do. But luckily, Mark and I are both fans of Spider-Verse, so we agreed to put it in 3-step, which is for the uninitiated, though I think most people watching will be initiated. 3-step, you have an image and it holds for 3 frames on the screen and then 3. And that's the anime frame rate, actually, 3 frames.
Okay. So did that match the 3D frame rate then, or was it
yes,
different?
well, I had to request that the 3D frame rate was set to 3 threes so that we'd have less work to do. And I think I would have died if we hadn't done that. So
I think that's because I think when you're doing that stuff, especially when you're doing drop frame rates, Mark, I don't know if you had any problems with this in terms of the staggering and stuff you can sometimes get when you're doing lower frame rates and you have camera movements. Did that cause any problems, especially with 3D as well?
I'm quite aware of that sort of thing. I've worked on shows before, like worked on shows like Digby Dragon, which were stepped, and yeah, it was very aware that if you move the camera, you have to make sure it's also stepped on exactly the same frames, otherwise you get that horrible jitter effect. And I think there was only one shot where it really came in, and that was that one with the which you did that lovely bubble for, Millie, where the camera panned out quickly. And,
that bit I had to do on ones so that it would work with the camera. I had to just add more frames to it so that it would move.
You let one through.
Yeah, I mean there were several shots in bits of animation in the film where we couldn't just get away with it on freeze. Like it's typically it was more the rule for it was do it on freeze, but if you need to do it on 2s or 1s you can, but generally keep it on freeze to help like lower the work and just keep that sort of step style. It's kind of that's the
in my main 2D job anyway, we tend to do the frame rate according to what we can get away with. You have to work the frame rate with what camera movement or whatever is going on. So I'm not unused to that. That's sometimes you just got to draw more frames. Sometimes you just gotta.
Yeah, cool. So all of that, it just worked beautifully in terms of how it integrated. But then it came to kind of the light and comp, which is where Jack McEntire came in. I'll ask you as well, Jack. Had you used Blender before?
No, it was my first time. So all that I did was do the usual tutorials that everyone does when they start Blender, and I was kind of off. But it was an interesting way to get into it because it was so unconventional what we were doing, I suppose. Obviously, I came on as the rest of us did as lighting comp artists, and we kind of quite quickly learned that it was more about playing with the shaders and just clicking through all of the steps and getting everything working rather than having too much artistic interpretation from our part going on. But it was brilliant. It was, as I say, it was the first time that I had used it, but we've since used it a lot in short form. But the best thing about it is the speed of it, I suppose, and the way that you can kind of see everything quite easily. For example, the shaders, if you want to view any part of the shading network, you can at any time. The renders come through super quickly, which is really good, but it was largely an extension of what Jack was doing, my role in this. So it was going through and making sure that all of the color scripts matched as they should, the grain scale was correct. It was largely firefighting and refining.
Because there are quite a few people worked on the light and comp. There's quite a big team for that as well. So how did you get all of that kind of coherent?
Yeah, that was another tricky one, because I think we had pretty much one person per shot or one person per 2 shots. Lots of people obviously wanted to be involved. So as I say, the main thing was making sure that all of the steps that we needed to be followed were followed. So to make the shots consistent, we really needed to go through and make sure that everyone was doing things in exactly the same way, because as a lighting artist, you come on and you want to make things look amazing and you want to try this and you want to try that, and it's all exciting and new and it's Blender and it's, oh, I can do whatever I want. And quickly we had to like stop that and try and pull things back into line. So I made up a few documents and a few little guides to try and get things to become uniform. But yeah.
I know there was a lot of balance, wasn't there? Because I think this shot, which went through a lot of iterations in terms of, is it too 3D, is it too flat?
Yes.
How did you kind of approach that? Because it's a very tricky thing. Was that just working with Grant and Mark a lot in terms of refining that?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously Jack as well, because although Grant had done all of the concepts for these things, the shaders that we had created, or largely that Jack had made, looked fantastic for most of the shots. But then when we wanted something more dramatic or something a little bit different, we quickly had to figure out how we could change them or layer things up to make them work for different parts of the short, because it had a kind of evolving mood throughout. So yeah, it was tricky. It's a lot more difficult than you'd imagine to make things look that simple. As I say, we kind of wanted to add all the bells and whistles that we could, and we had to just keep pulling back, and I had to keep referring people back to exactly what the concept was. So yeah, it was.
Which, because just small pixel changes did change the entire shot quite a lot. So even though, which I guess made it harder, because you're going for such a precise style that I guess hadn't been done in many animations that a team had done before, makes it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And obviously, because it was our first time doing this, and although that Blender is fantastic at allowing you to do things in a much faster way and a more creative way, it's tricky when you've got any kind of pipeline going on, because it's quite new for things like that. And obviously we're new to it also. So when we were dealing with asset problems or things linking properly between people, it just became about managing the asset and the technical side of things rather than the artistic.
And you can see this, I think the close-ups were some of the biggest challenges, because you really saw kind of what it was, and there's no hiding.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the void was what we struggled with the most. I didn't work on it too much, but I know that the people who did, there was a lot of back and forth, and Grant really got involved with it and started bringing in his own textures and playing with things in After Effects and trying to layer things up to get it to really work, because it's a difficult thing until you start doing it. You don't realize that, like, if the animation is animating at this rate, what rate should the grain be animating at? What rate should the texture be animating at? How should it move when they move? Should it stay put? And all of this. So there was a lot of iteration to be done, and you don't necessarily anticipate those things because it was such a stylized job. I don't think we've done anything quite like it before.
Like we wanted to, like, the like, for example, like the edges of the face in the void, we wanted to make sure that was nice and feathered and blurred to give this ethereal effect, but then that needs to be sort of animated, otherwise it's like that's all very like smooth while everything else is moving, and it's all very hard to get.
Because it was such a long time ago, I'm struggling to remember exactly what we did for this job and exactly what I've done since in Blender. But one of the tricky things is the compositor. Although it's brilliant to have it there, it's not at the moment fantastic for sequences. So if you want to animate things or do effects, that was a bit of a struggle. So I think we resorted in the end to pulling it out and playing around in Nuke and layering things up a bit in other softwares. But it is really good for the initial passes and being able to see how it could look without having to render it out or wait or any of that. It was quite a process.
And there are some questions here about saying, asking a Blue Zoo using Blender more, and you have used it in your team making commercials quite a bit, haven't you?
Yeah, we're using it all the time in short form. We're onto a new project now where we're using it as well. For me, it's brilliant. Like, I've loved using it. I think it's a really good tool for helping people to understand the basics of the 3D pipeline and how it all works. As I say, being able to view nodes. I think animation is the tricky bit, and rigging, which I luckily don't get involved with. So the animators tend to not want to use it as much. But if you're doing like in comp and funny stuff and making effects and quick bits and bobs, it's really, really good for that. And it helped me a lot to apply the same skills and mindset to my Maya work. Although I kind of struggle to go back to it now, because I'm so in love with the idea of instantly being able to see what I'm doing that going back to Maya feels very clunky and old. But they both have their pros and cons, and for this kind of quick turnaround creative stuff, it seems like this is definitely the way to go, especially when it comes to NPR rendering. It's really, really good.
Also, I think because it's so accessible, so you just see what teenagers are doing Blender now, and it's just crazy how good they are.
Yes, yeah, it is mad. I mean, our intern, I guess I can probably mention, what is he, 17? The Blender intern we've got?
Josh, he's a permanent employee.
Sorry, yes, he's recently
he was our intern,
but
it's so good he got stuck here.
It is slightly frightening, isn't it? And there's so much content out there for it. It is, it's amazing. It's really, really good.
Yeah, excellent. So we've got a question here. Mark, how long did the project take? I'm just seeing who asked that. Wim asked, how long did the project take?
Well, the pitch was in late November, and then I think we didn't really start actually getting down into the design work and the pre-production until about early January, very end of December, and then we got the final color grade by mid-April, end of April. So that's how long it took. So all the design work was pretty much done in January, so that by February rigging had been done and we could really start laying everything out, getting animating done through the bulk of February, and then March and April was mostly finishing animation and getting all the comp and rendering done and lighting.
Yeah. And was that juggling with your normal job, or how you can tell people how that kind of worked?
I think at first, for all the design phase, I was doing some projects. That's when I was still working in the short form department at Blue Zoo. But I think there were some bits and bobs for certain jobs that I would have to do during the day, but it wasn't too much to balance. And then come I think about January, late end of January, I was from Sinking Feeling full time, which was really, really good. I'm very thankful for that, because then I could really focus my energies to this.
There's a lot of people to wrangle.
Yeah, a lot of people to wrangle. Yeah, a lot of people to talk to. It was really nice. It was a very social experience, being stuck in my room during lockdown. Honestly, I don't know I would have fared as well if it weren't for it.
And it was people working all different hours as well, because Jack was in Vancouver, so a different time zone, and then a lot of people were working on it in the evenings, and we said they can put in their timesheet claims for it to make sure that they were being paid for it, but it still ended up with hours working everywhere.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was a good idea, I think, to get my working times, my work hours shifted through flexi time. I ended up officially working from about 12 to 8 rather than 10 to 6 standard, just because everyone started working and started messaging me for feedback around 7 or around 6 o'clock. So I was like, oh, right, I need to do something about this, otherwise I'm suddenly working a lot more. So I just had those changed.
Yeah. And so obviously this was your first time directing. Was it what you've obviously done directing with the kind of small projects before, but it's your first big project. Was it what you imagined it would be?
Yes and no. It was, a lot of it felt familiar from previous projects, but I think the scale of it was certainly not, and talking to so many people about it, it was certainly much more very enriching experience, because I learned so much, not just from certain mistakes and learning from those, but also from other staff members and other people working on it. It was great working with Grant. I learned a lot about the way he approaches projects and the way he approaches sort of design language. Yeah. I think what I do wish is I wish I hadn't panicked so much early on, because it was such a big project, and also because the subject matter of it is so sort of important and seemed to have so much gravity about it. I think in the first month, at least, I definitely had this feeling of, oh, I need to get it right, otherwise, it's a big deal. And it kind of, I think for the first few weeks, I was certainly second guessing myself. And I remember one point we had a little meeting where I was talking about all these things oh, maybe we should redesign this, maybe we should redesign this, and you were like, it's fine, it's fine, Mark, don't fix what ain't broken. And I think that helped eventually it helped to sort of just treat it like any project and sort of keep in mind what the message is, and it's all about the message and that. But I think eventually it just came right. It's just another project. Just do your best and see how it turns out. And I'm very happy how it turned out in the end.
Yeah, it's turned out amazingly.
Yeah.
Wim's got another question on the 2D side of it, so it might be one for you, Millie.
Yes, I'd like to answer this one.
You know what it is. Do you lock the camera before deciding on the 2D anim, or do you still want to be able to tweak the camera after 2D?
Firstly, Wim, how dare you? No. No, it's fine. It's 3D animators can edit the cameras and everything as much as they like in their projects, and I believe that's a great power and they should always have it. But my poor coworker had to reanimate the ripples around that boat 3 or 4 times because of camera tweaks.
Yeah.
Because the
tricky
2D perspective is like fake, it's plastered on the camera so that you can kind of pretend it. We had the flat 2D drawings, and then we had fake drawn on the screen on the camera of like any ripples coming up over the side of the boat. Every time you tweak the camera slightly, it will offset with the boat. Maybe there's a couple bits you can save, like you could reattach the water to the oars or whatever. But every time you tweak the camera, you will end up having to redraw the 2D effects, unfortunately. I wish there was a way to fix that, but there is not. It will have to be redrawn.
Was that Mark? How did you find that, kind of knowing that the direction changes that you'd make had an impact like that? It must have been really hard to say what's in your vision, but then knowing the human impact.
Yeah, I think learning that a decision that I'd made like weeks or even a month ago, like in layout, suddenly can't ever be changed was kind of like, whoa. But luckily the vision for most of the shots didn't change too much throughout it. It was only a certain few that needed any changes.
It was only the boat, I remember, and then maybe my bubble animation changed slightly, but that was because I started working on it before the animators were completely done with it. But as far as I knew, it was only the boat one which changed. So you did a very good job not changing the rest of it.
Thank you. I think early on my hope was, because of the way we were doing it in grease pencil, it would be somewhat done in a way where it would be there present in the scene so that the camera could change slightly, and it wouldn't affect too much of the animation because it wasn't done entirely to camera on a flat plane. But whilst that is true, it's not. It still would massively change the way it looks. And 2D artists even then will animate to camera. So it was, like you said, some bits could be saved, but some bits just couldn't. So that definitely was a very limiting thing of not being able to change the camera. But I think I think I know it, knowing that, that's why I definitely wanted to nail the 2D animatic perfectly and the layout perfectly, because I knew that it would cause problems down the line making these big changes, especially when you've got people working, out of hours. You don't want to mess them around. So.
Thank you, Wim. Important question. More people should know about this. Thank you.
There's a question from Kelly. Is that in order to keep the lighting similar but fit the changing mood throughout the short, did you use guides as your sort of base setting and then find subtle variations for different sections, or did you look at parts of the story separately?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's exactly what we do in a normal job. Change the lighting. We could do as much as we wanted to, spin the lights around in any direction in a normal setting. But here, because we were so limited and the colors had to be exact, and we only had like 2-tone, rather than changing the lighting to affect the mood, I think in the end we just went with a very subtle shift in grade throughout. Like Jack was mentioning earlier, that jacket and the shapes of things, if you span the light in the wrong direction, they started to look horrific. So it was really, rather than making the lighting fit the mood, what we were trying to do is make the characters look nice and attractive, and then afterwards we just did subtle grade shifts, I think, to change the mood for each scene.
I think the key word was consistency. We needed to make sure everything looked consistent and matched, because I remember you got one shot early on looking brilliant, and we wanted to make every shot match that. And a lot of different, we wanted to get that consistency throughout the shots. And then I think in color grading is where we actually went and made the color palette get a little bit sort of dingier towards, the middle point of the scene, film. So to help the sort of, emotional sort of story kind of go along a little bit. But for the most part, we just tried to keep it consistent.
Yeah. Cool. And Catty asks, is Blue Zoo planning to make any more shorts on this type of subject to help mental health awareness? I think we are looking at how we can do more of this type of thing. So it's definitely not the end of our wanting to use our resources and platform to help others. So yeah, hopefully have more on that. So I think that's all the questions we had. So cheers for asking them. And I think that's it. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone, to Mark, Sarah, Jack, Millie and Jack again for answering everyone's questions. And most of all, thank you to all of you and the whole rest of the team for putting in such an incredible effort. It really was a back-breaking project to do. I'm sure Mark will testify to how grueling it was.
It wasn't that bad.
Well, it was dealing with a lot of new things.
Yeah, okay, it was, yeah.
Yeah, if I could share real quick, that question before about whether it's worth learning Blender or not. From the 2D side of it, I absolutely think you should learn it. It's a free program. It's not quite as scary as I made out. There are plenty of tutorials online, and if you're like me, the one person in a studio who has perhaps opened Blender before and isn't scared of palettes being called materials rather than color palettes, then you should absolutely pick up Blender and learn it.
I'd agree with that for 3D as well, because like especially if you're just getting into animation, it's free. It like we were saying the other day, like we were able to run the software on our home computers, which are nothing, but you know, some people are working off laptops. And even if you do then later end up looking for work somewhere where they do use Maya or something else, it's similar enough that you can transition. So it's a great entry point for people.
Yeah. And
one for Catty, if you need to, well, not, is it Catty? Yep, Catty. If you need tutorials on 2D stuff in Blender, Worthy Kids is a great place to start. If you find Worthy Kids on YouTube, he posted a somewhat messy tutorial, but it works.
So many good tutorials. Cool. Okay, so I just wanted to finish on saying, please do, everyone, we made this short for Papyrus. So please, on whatever social media platform you're on, do follow and share what they're doing, because they are, you know, making a genuine change, and we really hope we've helped them in their mission to do that. So they share invaluable advice, and they've got this, you know, short was about sharing about their Hope line, which you can ring up if you're struggling yourself or you're concerned about someone else who's struggling. They can give you life-saving advice on how to help those people you're worried about. So please, as soon as this is finished, please do go and follow them in any way you can to help spread their message. Cheers everyone again for watching this, and
thank you for coming, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay,
Thanks.
thank
See
you.
you
That's all.